Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. We are pleased to welcome Bishara Addison. She's been described as a passionate advocate for economic and workforce development, a coalition builder, a strategic thinker and developer, and a policy nerd. She worked in Cleveland Metropolitan School District in strategic implementation when she returned to Cleveland following her education, and then at Towards Employment, overseeing policy and strategic initiatives, and she was instrumental in the implementation of some fair hiring practices throughout our community. In the midst of the pandemic and in the throes of the greatest workforce disruption the United States has ever seen, she courageously transitioned to her new role at the Fund for Our Economic Future as Director of Job Preparation. A good part of her responsibilities there will be improving talent outcomes. In just 15 short months, she made her impact with critical data collection and analysis on the state of work and the worker. This research is informing and guiding critical economic development and business decisions for Northeast Ohio's future. Her impact was quickly recognized and her talents further honored when just over a month ago, she was sworn in as representative for Ohio House District 9. The priorities she outlined as she took her place in the Capitol are the same that she has dedicated her life to addressing: advancing equitable economic and workforce development and combating income inequality. And I think this picture just says it all. Beaming supporters around her, incredibly proud, and Bishara just beaming with the opportunity that lies ahead. And when she's not driving back and forth between Cleveland and Columbus or doing her job at the fund, she somehow finds time to devote her talents to the African American Philanthropic Committee at the Cleveland Foundation, the Adams Board, and the City Club Debate Committee. When she was recognized by Cranes as 20 in their 20s, she stated, "It is her dream to make visions happen." We are honored that Bishara served in our inaugural class of Stokes Fellows in our Advanced Leadership Institute, and we are pleased to welcome Representative Addison to our conversation today. Bishara?
Yes, thank you. And that is quite an introduction. I hope I'm living up to it because I'm just like, oh, I don't know that I would describe myself that way, but those are really, really good words. So maybe I should, borrow that. I'm glad this is recorded. And so I'm really happy to be here. One of the things that we're going to do today is dig into a organizational project. So basically, it's all hands on deck. Everyone is working on this that are participating at the fund, and looking at what is happening in our labor market right now. So I'm going to bring up my slides now that I can share, and then we'll get started. Hopefully, people can see that. Where do I see slideshow? All right, can everyone see that?
Yes,
awesome.
Looks good.
All right, so the main topic today is really to understand where are the workers. This project got started towards the end of last year, and everyone kept asking us these questions like, what's going on in the labor market? What is happening with this great resignation? Why are people leaving their jobs? Why aren't people coming back to work? And we realized we're getting enough of these questions that we should probably have an answer to it. And so we decided to kind of embark on really looking at some of the headlines and pressure testing those headlines with existing research, and then also exploring the perspectives of employers and workers. Just to give you a little bit of context, the Fund for Economic Future is a really unique organization. We are a network of philanthropic, government, private sector, education, organizational leaders who are really thinking about how do we advance an inclusive economy for Northeast Ohio. And we really do that in three ways. We try and understand what matters, we try and advance what works, and we try and prepare for what's next. And the biggest thing that we're working on right now, of course, is where are the workers. And how we were able to approach this research, because it's truly unprecedented. When I think about the national networks that I'm a part of that really focus on workforce, I don't know of any community that's taken this kind of approach and has this rich kind of data. So it was a three-part, multi-part analysis. It started with a national scan of existing research. And so we were pressure testing headlines and theories that us as staff had been seeing. And we said, what does the existing research say? And we actually have kind of an analysis of that on our website. Then we subsequently moved to let's get the employer perspective from employers across the region and follow that up with focus groups. And then finally, and that's the stage that we're in right now, is we hired a public polling firm called Seymour, and we tried to gather evidence and information from residents across Northeast Ohio, nearly 5,000 respondents. And so 5,000 is an important number because it signifies statistical significance, and really understand how workers are feeling, what their experiences are, and also following that with focus groups as well. And so right now, we are at the stage of, we have finally completed getting the working age adult survey. So this is the polling, all of the polling that we did. That's coming to a close. And we've also done some focus groups. And so we're really at the stage of calibrating all of this information. I got to tell you, it's a lot. So this is more of a commercial than it is anything else. But we do expect to have a stronger analysis and calibration in Q3 of 2022. So stay tuned. When it comes to the perspectives we got from employers, we had over 750 employers from across the region, across sectors, respond to our employer survey. We work with Team NEO to also conduct focus groups and employer roundtables, and we had over 250 participants at these roundtables. And so these are employers that were coming together who are willing to look at the employer survey and say, does this make sense? Does this resonate for you? And what are you actually experiencing? Give us some context, shed some light. And what we found is that the labor market feels tight because it is. Nationally, for every one unemployed person, there are 1.8 open positions. So that means that we have more positions than we have people. And so it's not a surprise that we actually have a tight labor market. And we know that employers are really facing this crunch. What we saw in the employer survey was that of the respondents, 78% said that they were feeling a talent shortage, and they were experiencing higher than usual turnover, and they did not have a sufficient pool of qualified candidates. I know that you've probably heard the term skills gap. I prefer the term skills mismatch, but we do know that as a community, we're not producing the number of individuals with the right credentials to match the kinds of jobs that require those credentials. So there is a mismatch. People have skills, people might have credentials, but they don't have the ones that are open right for the jobs that are open right now. When we did the working age adult survey, so this is really the public polling, trying to get a taste of what workers are experiencing. You'll see on this slide that it ranged across age, race, and ethnicity. We also asked about income and education. So we found that only 32% have a bachelor's degree or higher. If you think about some of the jobs, whether it's nursing, we know that we're experiencing a shortage there, or in IT, those are programs that often require a bachelor's degree or higher. And so it's obvious that employers might be struggling to find talent. And then over 50% of the respondents made less than $50,000 a year. And if we go up to like 80,000, actually it's about more than 2/3 are not making over six figures. And so here are some things that they told us. One, we asked a question on people are quitting without jobs lined up, which we found to be really strange. Like, how do you quit a job and not have a plan? And so people are leaving, And they are, when we ask the question, did you have a job lined up? A significant number of the individuals who said that they had quit their jobs said that they didn't have a plan. And we found that people were leaving for a few key reasons. And so this was basically, we had a tagging system to be able to kind of categorize different kinds of responses. So this was an open-ended question. And you can see these were the top reasons why individuals were possibly left their last job: toxic work environment, low pay, in transition, and scheduling conflicts. And what I think is really important to note is that toxic work environment showed up as one of the reasons that people were leaving their jobs the most. Overpay. And that's actually pretty consistent when we did focus groups with some of our working age adults. In the focus groups, I'm thinking of one focus group we did around the hospitality sector. And it's not that pay wasn't an issue, but when we asked them, you know, what are some of the barriers you're experiencing, or what are some of the challenges you have in work, they didn't talk about compensation until they were prompted, which means there's a bunch of other factors that go into the decision-making of workers. We also expect that people will keep leaving. They're going to start looking for new jobs, they might retire, and especially they might start freelance or contract work. And I believe that that is a growing trend of individuals taking their expertise and deciding to start their own business and contract out where they feel like they have strengths. And also the gig economy, which traditionally we think of the gig economy as kind of the app-based work. And individuals are doing that at higher rates too, which of course, when I think about 10 years ago, Uber Eats, DoorDash, that was not, those kind of programs didn't exist at scale, but they certainly do now. And they were hiring during the pandemic, and individuals actually do kind of like that work. We also asked around, you know, those who are planning to quit, they could be convinced to stay. And so that was another interesting finding that we had, is that actually there are things employers can do to encourage people to stay. When I mentioned earlier about gig work, we know that it's expanded options for workers in a time of uncertainty. Some said that it was their main job. A good share of them had started that work in the last 2 years. So this is part of the pandemic. 84% said they enjoy this type of work. So these are the kinds of jobs that are competing with more traditional work that you might think of as in healthcare, manufacturing, and IT, the driver industries in Northeast Ohio. And we also found out that individuals who are not employed or considered themselves working full-time also have done this kind of work in the past year. So it also appears to be kind of a gap filler as individuals are trying to think about their next steps. And who is choosing this gig work? Well, I will tell you that it's a lot of young adults. You'll see that at the bottom of the slide for 18 to 24-year-olds, 42% say that they really enjoy this type of work. We've also been looking at industries, and we found that 31% of construction workers were engaged in that type of work, and 40% of hospitality workers. So these are individuals who self-identified as working in these industries, and on top of that, also work in the gig sort of economy, which means individuals are cobbling together multiple sources of income from different places. And what's telling is individuals are trying to structure their lives a little bit differently, and maybe their attitudes towards work. Just to dig in deeper into what it means to think about compensation, one of the top strategies that employers have employed to attract workers back into the workforce is raising wages. And we also see that for workers, even though wages is really important, there's a couple of other things that are important to them too, and specifically thinking about meaningful work, flexible hours, having PTO, paid time off, and advancement opportunities. And that is not a surprise that when people think about opportunities for work, they're looking at it holistically. They're not looking at it as a one-off. And so compensation is a really great starting point, and it's not enough. And workers are looking for certainty. I think about what we saw in for the importance of salary information in job listings. 72% of respondents said that it was very important to them. And it was interesting, the Fund for Economic Future, we're actually hiring for like 3 positions right now. And we had to have a conversation of, this is what our survey feedback said. We need to not have, to be determined, or, you can negotiate your wage. Like, we actually need to be able to have something in the job description to give workers certainty. So what we heard and what we saw is we need to employ a different practice ourselves. And those are the kinds of questions that we are hoping this research provokes, is that it increases dialogue, that it provides insight to employers to act on, and it tells us a little bit about what kinds of things we should be preparing ourselves in the workforce ecosystem for the kinds of opportunities individuals want to go into and what it takes to do those things well. We also know that there are a lot of barriers to employment. Pay always comes up, but health issues, disability, transportation, caregiving, and childcare were all some of the issues that were coming up, as well as the lack of work experience. And so what that says for us is that individuals might be looking for more opportunities. Interestingly, and I don't believe in this slide deck, we found that many workers also don't actually know where to go for technical training or supportive services, which means in our ecosystem, we have a mismatch. And just to give you a profile of some of the individuals that we consider low income, and this is important because the fund really has a vision that we can reduce disparities and make sure that people have economic opportunity regardless of race or place. And so we are looking at individuals who have somehow experienced distress. And so we specifically wanted to do a deep dive in for individuals who have a household income under $25,000. Who were those individuals and what were they experiencing? And it shouldn't come as a surprise that many were women, many were Black, they had lower educational attainment. They may not have had children in the household, which suggests to me that there's a lot of young adults. And we found that the largest portion of the individuals who fit this profile were 18 to 30-year-olds. We also knew that they were experiencing high barriers. One of the things that they really wanted to, and I hone in on one of the last bullet points on this slide, is flexible work hours and affordable childcare. And that was a big issue for this particular income group. And so before we jump into questions, there's a couple things that we want to take away, so implications for employers. Obviously, we have way more research than our time today allows, but there are some takeaways we have, and we're going to call that the 3 C's: compensation, culture, and connection. Compensation is always the right starting point. It's really important. And the question that we can ask ourselves, we know employers are raising wages to attract workers, and workers yet still say they're not making enough to make ends meet. And so clearly there's something going on that is not allowing for a marriage between the right compensation and being able to have a living wage. But also when we think about one of the main reasons why people were leaving, organizational culture was a big one. And so that is something that where employers can really dig deep and think through, what does it mean to create an inclusive, welcoming environment? And the last is connection. We need to invest in making sure that there are career pathways for individuals, providing supportive services, and really making sure that people find meaning in their work. And so those were our takeaways. And of course, we're going to have a ton more information coming out. We're working on kind of a final report right now. And then there will be a subsequent report that really combines the information from both the national scan that we conducted, all of the employer-facing research and data we collected, as well as the experiences of working age adults. And I think that is all I have. And I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to ask some questions.
Bishara, thank you. And I know this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the research that's being done. And it is just fascinating to understand what's been happening these past few months. So let's dive into some questions. As you have been working with this data and the work that's been going on, what aspect has interested you most or maybe surprised you most?
There's a couple things. I've had a couple main interests, and I think if you were to talk to our staff, because this really is like an all-team effort, you might get different answers from different colleagues of mine. But I've been especially interested in the gig work because I have a hunch that we're going to see more and more individuals quitting their jobs and starting LLCs, particularly women with higher levels of education, because they're looking for that flexibility. And also more and more individuals taking up app-based work. And I have a feeling that you're going to see a higher proportion of individuals who are people of color, because those jobs have lower barrier to entry. And we know that many individuals, people of color in like our urban centers, have quite a few barriers, both individual and barriers that are outside of their control. So like based on the kinds of things that systemic racism impacts, we know that those barriers exist. But those jobs in kind of the app-based work have lower barrier to entry. And my concern, so this is what I'm flagging, is that your earning potential looks different depending on the kind of work you decide to do. So I think about if you have a master's degree and you're starting your own LLC to do communications and marketing, what you can charge for a corporation or a nonprofit is a lot higher than what someone might be making. And there's a clear ceiling because there's only so many hours in the day for how much you can make in app-based work. And so I'm concerned that we're going to see a new kind of income disparity. And so that's one of my main interests when looking at this research. I also have a strong belief that childcare is having a real impact on women returning to work. Interestingly, that is not showing up in the data as much as I thought it was, but it did show up in our focus groups. And so I think there's more to unpack there. I was surprised, and I still have a strong belief that it's an issue. And so I want to dig deeper into of the individuals who responded saying that childcare was a barrier, what those individuals look like, what income groups did they come from, what was their race, gender, of course. I'm making an assumption that it's mostly women, but we can actually look at that data. So one of the things that is great from how we did this working age adult survey is that we can slice the data in a lot of different ways.
So building off of the focus around gig work, is there a concern among workers who are in the gig economy around healthcare? Or is it being provided? How are they accessing that?
That's a really good question. And I think we might have a focus group that is specifically geared toward gig workers. I don't think that we've had that focus group yet. So I think it's being scheduled, but it was one of the areas that we want to dig into. And so that's actually a great question that I don't know we have like specific data around, but could show up in a focus group. And so this is a question I'm going to take back. And when the public polling firm that we've used, Seymour, schedules that focus group, I'll try and incorporate that question.
And you mentioned briefly the return to work. So assuming the data did go into perceptions around returning to work, so how should employers be approaching the return to the office to attract talent, yet build and maintain their culture?
That's a really interesting question. And we did, I took out that slide because I only had so much time to present, but we did specifically ask individuals about their attitudes towards work. And we did find that people's attitudes towards work has changed. And we also asked about they had preferences from working from home, hybrid, and working in the office. And we found that there was kind of an even split. So there are individuals who want to go back to the office. There are individuals who want to work from home, and there are some people that have preferences around hybrid. So I think it depends on the industry and it depends on the individual. I'll specifically look at construction. So we did a specific poll around construction because we partnered with the Greater Cleveland Partnership on an event around construction. And when I looked at that particular question as it relates to construction workers, their answers were they prefer to work in the office, which shouldn't be surprising because if you're working in construction, you're working on a site. So that's a very in-person, you can't do construction from your home. However, when I looked at new workers or individuals who were coming into the industry of construction, most of the individuals said that they had been, identified as construction workers, had been working in construction for 3 years or more. So if we think about where the pandemic comes in, it says to me they're not bringing in a significant number of new workers. And so the individuals who really like to work in person are individuals that were already in the industry.
The toxic workplace was cited as one of the main reasons for leaving. Have you explored how folks define toxic workplace, or how might that have been defined on the survey itself?
So it was an open-ended question. And so we didn't give like a multiple choice, like of these 5 things, what is like your biggest reason? We had a tagging system. So when people answered that question, we were able to categorize responses by kind of how did they fit into a particular category? And so individuals came up with toxic work environment on their own. They weren't prompted when we asked that question. And so I don't think that we asked how they were defining it, but we know that it was something that came up unprompted.
And as you think about the skills mismatch, how might our community best work to address this?
Excellent question. I think there's a couple of things. I mean, credential attainment and post-secondary education is really, really important. I think we want to make sure that we start early. Career exposure has to, when I say career exposure, but like thinking about different industries that young people might want to go into, that exposure needs to start in like middle school at the latest, so that we can kind of grow that talent pipeline. I believe, so this is Bishara speaking and not necessarily as a fun staff member, that we have to have a ground game to get people to understand what their opportunities are. I think about individuals who, let's say, have never worked in manufacturing. Well, you know what a doctor is because you go to the doctor. You know what retail is because you might go to a store to get groceries. You don't actually see what happens in a manufacturing facility as you're growing up. So it has to be brought to you, or you have to be brought to it, and there has to be some intentionality. And I think that we really need to have like almost a political organizing strategy to make sure that people understand what the opportunities are in Northeast Ohio. And then finally, we know that we do have gaps in literacy and numeracy. It's not that people are illiterate, but their literacy and numeracy skills don't match the kinds of jobs that we have a lot of openings for. So even in manufacturing, you don't need a bachelor's degree, but you do need to have some, like you might need, particularly even in an IT, like 10th grade math. And so we need to have more refresher courses to be able to help adults connect to and build up their skills to maybe get into those industries, number one. We need to destigmatize those programs because no one wants to be called illiterate. So that's an issue. And we also don't value the fact that individuals who might struggle in that area have found ways to survive. And that means they're using a different part of their brain. They're using different skills, and we need to put a value on that. So that's part of the destigmatizing. And the last thing is we need more earn and learn programs and on-ramps. Individuals who are going through that kind of intensive programming, let's say all day, how are they paying their bills in the meantime. And so I hate to say that we just need to tie compensation to learning, but we do. And there's some structured models to be able to do that, like apprenticeships, but that's a process. You can still have on-ramps and earn and learn models without being a registered apprenticeship, even though I highly endorse that as a strategy.
Well, Bishara, before we started, we said that this was going to go very fast, and here we are at the end already. And we know there can just be so much more conversation to be had. So quickly, how can those of us on the call continue to learn and know more about the work that the fund is doing in this space?
Well, that's a layup. I see that one of my colleagues, Rihanna, has put a link in the chat. And so we have a landing page on our website that allows you to explore blog posts, updates on our research. You can subscribe to updates. And one of the cool things that we've done with this research, different from maybe other kinds of research experiences that people have had, is that we are pushing out information as we get it. So we made an approach or made a decision that we weren't going to wait until we had all of the information. Like, can you imagine an employer who is starving for workers right now, and we would tell them, we're not going to have a report until Q3 of 2022. And they're like, I got openings right now. I need an answer now. So we're pushing information out as we get it so that people can learn and have this experience with us.